Welcome to Soul Sparks with Saima. Today we are joined by an amazing guest, JT Pincus, a brilliant mind in motivation, emotion, and the deeper currents that shape human experience. In this episode, we are stepping into a realm that both fascinates and challenges us. The idea that the spiritual domain isn't just a part of life, but the very essence of reality itself. So, this conversation promises to be expansive, thought provoking, and grounded in the wisdom of someone who has spent a lifetime studying the inner world. So, once more, JD, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
You're warmly welcome. It's my pleasure to have you here. So, excuse me. So, let's start with when you say the spiritual domain is all there is. So, what core truth are you pointing toward?
So the way that I came to this realization was really by investigating all of the theories of motivation and what you can think of as sort of emotional needs that people have. My background's in psychology, and I was, kind of came up, through the standard education process, learning about things like, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And he proposed that there was a need for sort of, physiological needs, psychological safety, the need for inclusion, belonging, love, the need for esteem, and then the need for self-actualization. And that was sort of standard fare when I was in school. And I think it continues to be. It's taught in psychology, it's taught in business, and in other fields as well. Of course, there were a lot of other theories of motivation out there. There was David McClelland, who focused more on work than on self-actualization. So he came up with things like the need for affiliation, like to get along with other people, the need for power, to be able to influence other people, the need for achievement, the need for have sort of a material success as motivating forces. But that wasn't all. I mean, you also had all these folks who worked with children, like Lawrence Kohlberg and Jean Piaget, who discovered that children kind of had a natural sequence that they made in their understanding of things like morality and ethics. That there was a sort of a basic level where sort of might makes right. That whoever's in charge gets to make the rules, and you're good if you obey the rules, and you're bad if you don't. Then there's a level on top of that, which has to do with sort of, better sort of moral differentiation, understanding the context, understanding that there's competing needs at any given time, and how to best balance those. And interestingly, Maslow and Kohlberg both proposed that there was this highest level in both of their models. Interestingly, totally separate models, but they both called the top level transcendence, which is when you no longer are caring about yourself and your needs. You're no longer caring about sort of the material world. You're no longer even caring so much about the social world of the people that you happen to know or happen to be related to. But now you've gotten to a place where you care simply about the principle involved. What is the higher good? What is the cosmic good? And aligning your life with that, and that is the highest level of development. And in my model too, that's how it works. I've got these 12 needs. The lowest level is the same as Maslow's, the need for psychological safety, and the highest need is the need for spiritual transcendence. And my point is that we go through our lives, if we are effectively making progress in maturation and development, moving across from the self to the material, to the social, to the spiritual, and ultimately toward that transcendence. A lot of people will never make it there. A lot of people get stuck along the way at various uh, points. Different needs become salient to them, and they can no longer see the forest for the trees, and they're unfortunately stuck. Um, but my point is that the only way to truly, become all that you can be as a human is to make that full transition from psychological safety all the way to spiritual transcendence.
Mhm. Firstly, thank you for breaking that down. And hearing how you view the spiritual domain really adds depth to the conversation, I would say, JD. And the way you express it makes the idea feel much more grounded and accessible. Now, with that in mind, I'd love to go a bit further. So, how did you personally come to trust this perspective? Like, was it insight, experience, or a gradual awakening?
That's a great question. It's actually a combination of things, as you might expect. It's interesting. I personally experienced a lot of sort of setbacks and hardship, which caused me to sort of reevaluate some things. That definitely helped me to kind of reconnect with my spirituality. I was raised fairly spiritually. My mother was very involved in psychosynthesis. My father was very religious, and that gave me a very good grounding in spirituality and sort of its importance. So that when I kind of fell on hard times, it gave me something to kind of turn to, and I found it to be extremely helpful. In fact, helpful in a way that nothing else was. Um, in addition to that, I had been doing some research, commercially, and I was doing segmentation studies for various clients, and I got this result that was fascinating to me. It was a result that showed that you could split up the population according to their needs. You could split up the population in terms of whether they were more concerned about themselves or other people, sort of self versus social. And you could also split up the population according to whether they were more concerned about material success, versus higher principles, like the need to be responsible. Um, and when I saw that, it took me a good 20 years to connect the dots. But in retrospect, when I thought back on that result, I realized that it was a great validation of the model that I was proposing. Here it was, kind of something I had stumbled upon, 20 years ago, but it actually made complete sense in light of my model. So I'd say, you know, my upbringing led me here. Some events that kind of caused me to reflect on things brought me here, and also, in retrospect, a lot of the work that I had done, sort of psychological work, on large populations also brought me here. So it was a confluence of things.
Mm-hmm. That really makes sense. And hearing how you trust in this perspective grew through real hardship, like you said, and lived experience adds a lot of it to it. And it's really powerful that something so challenging ended up becoming such a grounding and, helpful guide for you. Now, building on that, I'm curious that, modern life often feels like it feels overwhelmingly materialistic. So why do you think people still feel an inner pull towards something deeper and less tangible?
Yeah, I think this is where we started, right? This is the concept that there is a deeper reality that we can't see, that we can't sense. And it's a sense, this shouldn't be hard to believe. We can't see gravity. We can feel its effects. We can't see radio waves, but if you have the right equipment, you can tune into them, and there they are. We can't see, broadcasts, Wi-Fi, and yet we rely on it every day. Uh, and we don't doubt that it's real. Uh, and yet, there is this sort of deeper reality that we just simply can't see. And we've shown this in experiments so many times where, what people think is true and is affecting their behavior turns out has nothing to do with what's actually affecting their behavior, that a lot of those things simply go on outside of conscious awareness. Uh, and once we realize that there is a sort of deeper truth, a deeper reality that we can only get glimpses of because we basically descended from primates here on Earth, with a survival instinct. We're not perfectly adapted to accessing the spiritual. Something you really have to work at. It's something where, the greatest, seekers have basically shown different paths of getting there. Some through, sort of mortification of the body, sort of, starving themselves and going into isolation and going into long periods of meditation. The Kabbalists would basically repeat, numerical and letter combinations over and over again, um, and until this sort of pathway opened up for them. And I think there's a lot of lessons in that. It exists in every culture. some tradition of this, whether it involved psychedelics or it didn't, or involved sort of deep meditation or some sort of, test that you had to put yourself through. It always led to the same place, which is some kind of a breakthrough, some kind of epiphany where you get a glimpse of the eternal, and that deeper reality. And I don't think it's an accident that every culture has a tradition of that, of these visions. It's not something that, just sort of is a coincidence. I think it's a real thing. It's a real phenomenon. And once you really accept that and believe that and let that into your life, it has a transformative consequence for you. It really changes things. It changes your perspective. And I think, ultimately, people feel that pull, even if they are kind of stuck in a commercial, consumerist culture where they're bombarded with advertisements and messages all day long. They still, underneath it all, their core values have to do with the spiritual, for most people.
Thank you for putting it that way, Jedi. And the gravity example really brings the idea to life. It's such a clear reminder that some of the strongest forces, shaping us are completely invisible, yet deeply felt. And the way you explained it makes that inner pull towards something deeper feel not just philosophical, I would say, but almost instinctive, like a natural part of being human that we are always responding to, whether we notice it or not. So that's really remarkable. So believe in that, I'd like to hear you. Love to hear your take. That do you think this longing is universal, or does it really come alive only when life pushes us to the edge?
That's a great question. I think it is a universal impulse. And my evidence for that is the fact that there has never been a society on earth that's known that did not independently create a religion. Why should there be religious impulses in every single community on earth that were all happening independently? And now there's actually evidence that there was belief in an afterlife among Neanderthals. So these are, sort of an offshoot from our species, that a lot of people would think of as not being, quite as evolved. It turns out they were quite evolved, and they would bury their dead with tools and things like that to use in the afterlife. Uh, to me, it's fascinating. It's like there is this, sort of subconscious awareness that there's something more meaningful. And I would take again as my evidence is the fact that we exist at all, the fact that anything exists at all. It doesn't have to. It doesn't have to exist in the way that it does. We don't have to have a planet that's tilted 23 degrees to perfectly bring us, spring and fall and winter and in summer. We don't have to be the perfect distance from the sun to support life. We didn't have to be a planet covered in water and life. All of these things. And the more you get into the physics of creation, the more astounding and improbable it becomes until you realize that the chances of this happening spontaneously are infinitesimally small. And then it makes you wonder, like, why did any of it happen? Right? Why did any of this happen to happen? Why are, sunsets so beautiful? And why are, the markings on animals so incredibly beautiful, like the best design that you could ever imagine, in tremendous complexity and beauty. And I think you have to sort of willfully turn away from that realization, in order to be blind to it.
Mm-hmm. Got it. And I really appreciate the way you frame that actually. Like seeing this longing as something universal really reframes it. It makes it feel like a natural part of being human rather than something that appears only in extreme moments, I feel. And that's a meaningful distinction for sure. Now, since you work deeply in emotions, uh, yeah, you were something you were able to.
Just gonna say that those extreme circumstances of suffering definitely bring about
Mhm.
those epiphanies. I think because what they do is break down the barriers that we walk around with every day. We walk around when things are good, we're walking around with blinders, and the blinders let us focus only on the things that don't matter. We focus on, how our favorite football team is doing or cricket team or how our our stocks are doing, and how what are we going to buy next. Uh, that those are blinders, and when we suffer, those fall apart because they no longer are sufficient to comfort us. And that's when we get a glimpse of this deeper reality. So I think there is a definite connection to suffering. And some people would say that there is no such thing as developmental growth without suffering. There has to be suffering. And that's been my experience. I hope it's not that way for everyone, but it certainly was for me.
Absolutely, I completely agree with that, JD. Now, like, how do you see, feelings functioning as signals or indicators of a spiritual reality underneath our everyday experience?
Yeah. So this I borrow from Antonio Damasio and William James and David Hume, even going back to him. The concept that our emotions exist really as indicators of homeostasis. They indicate to tell us how our body is doing, how are we functioning. The sort of most the easiest examples are if we're tired, that we feel like we need to sleep and we get motivated to that. We're thirsty, we need to get some water. If we're hungry, we need to get some food. But all of our emotions work the same way. If we're feeling excluded, then we feel a pull toward, a belonging need. If we're feeling unsafe, we want to restore that feeling of safety. We want to feel in control. If we're feeling bored, frankly, we want to feel immersed. So all of those things, we have an optimal level of any of those things. And when we feel out of whack, we can be too little, too much. Our emotions are telling us this is a homeostatic imbalance, and we need to be brought back into alignment with our kind of natural set point. And that I think is what happens here. That to me is what is where the spiritual fits right into this. That when we see something that's unjust, when we see something that's unethical, when we see something that sort of materialistic without any deeper meaning, those things offend us because we have a natural set point with regard to those concepts. Even though the things you can't see, the things you can't touch, they're concepts. They still are motivating, and I think that that's how I connect it. That sort of it just the way that we need a certain amount of sleep and water and food. We also need a certain amount of justice, ethics, and purpose. And that if we are being denied any of those things, it throws us out of balance. We don't feel right, and we want to take action to restore it.
That's a really compelling way to look at it, actually, JD. And the way you frame emotions gives them a kind of depth that goes beyond psychology, I would say. And they become something like subtle cues pointing us toward what's more real, not just what's immediate. And it adds a whole new layer to how we interpret what we feel day to day. And along those lines, I'm really interested in your perspective on something people often debate. Like, some say spirituality and science clash. So, how do you see them intersecting or even mirroring each other in certain ways?
Yeah, I think that that's a byproduct of sort of the Renaissance. It was sort of the beginnings of science. Russia, um, butting up against sort of medieval concepts of spirituality, which frankly were not real spirituality, in my opinion. I think they were really just used to control populations. They were sort of justifications for, why there was the sort of divine right of kings, giving them some sort of spiritual justification for why they had all the resources and all the power. So I think there was going to be conflict, and there was. Galileo was saying something that the church couldn't accept because that wasn't. They had a sort of naive scientific view from the Bible that was disproven by him. And there were a lot of people, sadly, who were put to death along the way. But now we've gotten past that point where now I think religion and spirituality has sort of opened its mind. It's no longer about controlling people. Now it really is, in many ways, an individual pursuit toward what I was talking about, that sort of spiritual transcendence. And therefore it's sort of democratized. It's not something that's being used to manipulate people. And by that sense of spirituality, there is no conflict with science, especially where science has gone. If you talk to physicists now about quantum mechanics, you'll certainly, there's no shortage of things to read about this. That it says that the more they learn, the more and more it looks less like science and more like religion. It's this concept that things can kind of come in and out of existence spontaneously. These kinds of things. We started with the example of gravity. The only way to make gravity make sense with the rest of physics is if you posit that there are 10 dimensions of existence. And we only know about, three, to sort of the three dimensions of our ordinary lives. And then some people throw in time as a fourth dimension, which is kind of cheating a little bit. In physics, you need 10 dimensions to accommodate, ordinary physics with gravity. To me, that's pretty strong evidence that there's something more that we can't detect. And why should we? We evolved on a planet of three dimensions. That's all we can sense. And if you are interested in the subject, animals grow and develop in all sorts of environments where their perception of reality is vastly different than ours. And because that's the niche they grew up, they developed in. Why we think we would be able to automatically apprehend, 10 dimensions of reality when we weren't evolved for that purpose is beyond me. So I see no conflict whatsoever. In fact, I think the more we learn both about spirituality and science, the more they're beginning to integrate together into a single worldview.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's really a meaningful way to frame it, Jerry. And the idea that spirituality has opened up, becoming less about control and more about personal exploration really changes how people relate to it. I feel that it gives individuals room to approach these ideas with curiosity instead of pressure, which makes the whole conversation feel more accessible and authentic. Now, thinking from that wider perspective, I'm really curious at how you see this playing out on a personal level. Like, if the spiritual domain is truly all there is, what does that mean for personal growth and everyday choices?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think we live in this three-dimensional world. We start off as babies and we become toddlers, then we grow into children, then to teenagers and then adults and etc. And there are natural developmental progressions that have to go on there. There are certain conflicts and tensions that have to be resolved. Those bring us through the ordinary reality, the ordinary reality of needing to feel safe and needing to be able to express ourselves, as individuals, the ability to kind of grow our potential in this physical world of ours, to express our autonomy, to feel immersed in our work, to achieve success, to feel inclusion, to feel caring, to feel recognition. And then ultimately to get to the spiritual, to feel a sense of justice, ethics, and a higher purpose. Those all play out in this physical world. It's only when we get to the end of that route, that it begins to open up to us this concept that we might be able to glimpse this deeper reality. I think there's no way to short circuit that. I think you have to climb the entire ladder, through all of the four domains, through all the levels, experience the suffering that we talked about, because that will come. It's inevitable. And from that, you'll have these deeper insights and deeper epiphanies and deeper, kind of gains in perspective until you get to that last piece, when I think that's when you begin to at least become aware of that deeper reality. So I think it's there the whole time. It's just we're in no position to see it or take advantage of it until we've sort of lived our lives and made the good choices, if you will, toward that kind of epiphany that you can get at the end.
Yes, that's a really very powerful way to actually put it. And I really appreciate how clearly you lay out the idea of moving through those, four domains. There's a simplicity to the way you explain it, actually, but also real depth. You make it feel practice rather than you make it feel practical rather than abstract. Like personal growth isn't just about insight, but about progressing, gains through layers that genuinely expand our experience. It's a compelling framework and express it in a way that really lands, I would say. So, this conversation reminds us that spirituality isn't a distant philosophy. It's a foundation beneath every thought, reaction, and moment of clarity of experience. So, listeners, if today's episode sparks something in you, explore it, sit with it, and let it guide your next step. Thank you for listening and keep nurturing the part of you that seeks truth beyond the visible.